Hi, folks, and welcome to this session of the Big Data and AI Conference. My name is Bill Wong, and I'll be talking about AI in healthcare and life sciences. I'm from DELL Canada, and I lead DELL's artificial intelligence and data analytics practice coast to coast, which includes healthcare and life sciences. The bulk of the presentation will focus on our experience in working with some of those organizations. And if we've got time, we'll talk about some of the things we're seeing coming down the pipe. So agenda, a quick update on digital transformation in these industries. Then we'll talk about our experience with an organization with drug discovery and their use of AI, a hospital in Ontario, and their experiences in accelerating AI. And then again, if we have some time, we'll talk about some of the future challenges we're seeing. So every 2 years, DELL does this survey on digital transformation. And it's across 18 industries, which includes healthcare and life sciences. And they interview or give surveys to 4,300 decision makers. That's director, C-level, across 18 countries. And if we focus on healthcare here, you'll see no surprise that with the pandemic, you'll see less digital laggards now, and more people in the middle there evaluating and adopting digital transformation initiatives. Now, some of the challenges, and in healthcare, and not surprisingly, I've seen this firsthand. It's tough to get at some of the data in healthcare. There's so many different formats there. And that's probably one of their top 3 barriers. Across the industry, 94% of businesses we're seeing face barriers to digital transformation. But in healthcare, the top 3 here are the ability to extract valuable insights here from data, making sure privacy, security is maintained, and a lack of budget. The good thing about this industry is they have great confidence in AI, and 3/4 are confident, some are confident or very confident on the benefits of AI in their industry. With life sciences, as you'd expect, they're a little more savvy with dealing with data, but certainly issues with privacy and security are big concerns. So we're going to talk about our experience with working with UBC and the Vancouver Prostate Center. And in the area of drug discovery, it is a very challenging problem. And if you're in the industry, you'll know firsthand just how long and complex this would take. I've had the opportunity to work with a number of researchers, and outside of the complexity here, and you can see all the tasks here, really, and the characteristics of what makes a good drug. It's such a challenging environment. The volume of data, difficult because it requires lots of resources in terms of compute. It can be risky, the drugs that they examine, very intensive and requiring capital and labor to test these drugs. Now, traditional drug development done in the lab, the estimate that most folks are citing is $2.6 billion, and this is over 10 to 15 years. And the success rate is less than 1%. So you can imagine the challenges people have, their risk preference for trying to create these new drugs. Now, over the past few years, people have tried to use computers, and they are, in accelerating this, but they really haven't developed that many new drugs here. And here, if you had a 200 petaflop supercomputer, the estimate that it would take 10 to the 35th number of years, which is a really big number, older than the universe itself, just to examine a molecule with just 30 atoms and whether or not that this would be a good drug candidate. We examine all the possible permutations here. So that's the complexity that we're dealing with. So even with computers, we don't have enough resources. Now, in this, what they call in silico, where we try to do drug discovery via computers rather than actually testing in a wet lab here, molecular docking is a very popular technique here. And it's the concept of a key and lock, where you have the right key, you will lock the normal function. So a protein or a virus has a target or binding site. A small molecule, which they call ligand, can come in and create a complex there where this new combined molecule will not function. And that's the hope of finding these drugs. And in order to do that, they develop scores to evaluate the strength of the binding. Now, here's one of the challenges here. On the left-hand side, there's the zinc database. So these chemical databases, or some people call them biobanks, that have been growing. And since 2015, the number of molecules that you can get from these databases have increased exponentially, whether these databases are in the billions now. And the one here on the bottom left-hand here, Enamine RS database, contains 38 billion molecules. And people, when they test molecules as a possible drug, they don't test them all. They test just a handful. And most drug endeavors, campaigns, will not test 99% of the available molecules in a database. Now, on the right-hand side, what the UBC team was doing was they had access to hundreds of compute nodes here, but with all their compute resources, which span research center, UBC, provincial resources, they were estimating for them to do molecular docking of 1 billion molecules to take 2.5 years. And so again, not something they could do feasibly. And the big challenge that not only UBC, but all these research facilities have is how can we screen and do molecular docking when there's billions to test in a cost-effective and timely manner. So enter deep learning. And so they've introduced, and I believe they were first to introduce this concept of deep docking by augmenting molecular docking with deep learning algorithms. They did test other algorithms, but they found that deep neural networks were the best ones in predicting the scores, or the binding scores. And what we want to do here is, with this technology, is to go back to these chemical databases and to actually test all these. And that's what they did. So they test against a publicly available billion plus database called Zinc 15, 1.36 billion compounds there. And on the table here that you see here, other research institutions were also doing this. And their molecular docking exercise, one institution had access to 45,000 cores, another one 27,000 plus GPUs. And here we have at the bottom UBC, with only 4 GPUs, they were able to do a campaign of over 1 billion molecular docking of the compounds there. And so they were the first that we're aware of that published the results of a 1 billion plus docking campaign. And as soon as that paper was released, it was cited 200 times in just 12 months. And it actually got released just as COVID was starting in early 2020. And then we had the opportunity to work together, and what they wanted to do is, okay, we're the first in a billion and people are kind of using our technique now, let's kind of up the ante here. And they wanted a docking campaign of testing 40 billion molecules. Now, with their current infrastructure they had, it would take them more than 10 years. They leveraged our HPC and AI lab, where we have a supercluster there of CPUs and of GPUs, and they used our GPU platform, and we were able to advance their research and into, well, accelerating here their compute requirements to just 10 days. So it was really a great exercise, a great opportunity, a privilege to work with them. And really what they've started is this new era of AI accelerated molecular docking, virtual screening of billions of compounds. Their vision is to build a platform where other researchers can come and use their platform to test their possible vaccine. So that's the drug discovery use case, and that was with UBC. This is a hospital in Ontario. They have a research facility, and the use case that they were looking at was to try to reduce wait time. And if you've worked in healthcare, this is a universal use case, very common requirement in all emergency wards. And what they want to do here, if you look at the diagram on the bottom, is as a patient arrives here, is to triage data about that patient. And the data that they want to get access to were health records, existing health records. And if you've worked with health records, they can be in very unfriendly formats to try to get any kind of useful information there. And then to automatically have an AI algorithm assess and deliver a diagnosis, push out an order for tests, and then come back and see how the patient is after that. Now, in order to do that, what the institution did was to build a data platform to house all the data. The toughest data were the medical records, and it's proprietary data formats. And healthcare probably has the most data formats that are proprietary, very difficult to integrate that with let's say, friendlier formats like relational. So that was where the bulk of the time was spent, was trying to get the data out of the EMR databases. Once they get that, to put it in a data platform where that data can be shared, and then put an optimized platform where it can get access timely by the clinicians here. And so what was proposed here, and what's on the left-hand side, the architectural principles, this is what the hospital wanted. They have currently dozens of AI projects, and each project has its own infrastructure, its own tools. Everybody scurries and begs, borrows, and steals compute and storage platforms. And so what they want to do is, okay, we can't really control, nor do we want to limit you on the type of tools you want to use. But when it comes to accessing resources, such as data, such as compute, such as storage, let's try to standardize there. So the initiative was to create an AI sandbox where the architects, developers would come in, and the environment would be provisioned for them using platform as a service. And there are some representative tools there. And they would use a data catalog, which is becoming much more popular in building these data platforms. And so happens that Boomi has one of these ones. All right. Moving on to a new use case, and this one isn't in Canada, but it's a common use case that we're starting to see in healthcare, that neither just AI nor classical simulations is enough to really help accelerate the drug discovery pipeline. And it's really a combination of analytics that's required to provide insight. In the COVID case, AI was used to kind of predict its molecular structure. And while that's being done, they would take their hypothesis and run simulations to see if a potential drug or vaccine would block the virus's replication. So this is an example of where we're seeing a lot of research pipelines is a combination of AI plus simulation. And because of that, what this slide attempts to show is on the left-hand side that the classical HPC type of workloads, more and more they're going to these high-end workloads to do not just simulations, but AI as well. On the right-hand side is what DELL calls a ready solution. So what this does, it allows you to coexist basically what tools that we generally see in research and academic environments driven by Bright Cluster Manager with the AI tools that such as Docker, Kubernetes, etc., and try to integrate that into one platform. And so this one platform allows you to have both environments, Bright Cluster Manager, or you could have it through Ansible-based packages there, and it would deploy these environments as required. So regarding personalized medicine, and if you're involved in any of these huge amounts of data, but as I've seen firsthand, the inflexible medical records, they're not designed for precision medicine. This is where people are going to spend 80+% of their time is to try to get that data out in a usable form and in a timely fashion. Again, let's talking about a little bit about some of the futures here, and again, working with UBC. What the pandemic has taught them is that, and even though they were ahead of the curve, for the most part, most of the world was unprepared. And what they're proposing here is kind of a defense system for other possible pandemics, pathogens out there. So again, they would use AI to accelerate their workflow. And these are existing viruses today, and thankfully they're not a pandemic around the world, but there are unfortunately diseases that are much more deadly than COVID. The first one here, up to 75% of those infected perished. So a very high fatality, and the one below is their fatality rate of 30%. This is a study I'm citing because it came out of Toronto. It was at a conference, a healthcare conference out of Stanford University, and they actually studied this conference and called it a clever way of kind of assessing how people react with AI. And in this experiment, what the researchers did was to give folks x-rays, and these are people in hospitals. They're either specialists, radiologists, or generalists, what they call non-experts, regular physicians. And they labeled the diagnosis of the x-rays either provided by AI or a human. And the assessments were on the left-hand side, that the radiologists were very harsh, much more negative when the diagnosis was incorrect. And on the right-hand side, what it tries to show is that given a diagnosis, generally they rated humans, the ones that were done by humans, as of higher precision than if it came from an AI program. So what the papers try to do is say that you're going to have to consider these kind of reactions, that the experts are going to be its harshest critics adopting this new technology, and there are many reasons why that would be. But it seems like the generalists, the non-radiologists, were much more apt, less critical on an AI diagnosis. So that was a bit of a rush through these slides, but just wanted to give you a broad brush of some of the organizations that we're working with and what's coming down through the pipe. And as for kind of our best practices, if you're in this field, what we always recommend is to have this data-driven culture. And while we do have that in many of the hospitals and healthcare, we do find that there are a lot of silos there still. So the big challenge is to try to consolidate and try to harness everybody's efforts. To try to have an architectural big picture approach. We do see, again, because of the silo approach and trying to get something done quickly, it's not necessarily optimized. Case in point, that hospital that has dozens of AI projects, but everybody is sub-optimizing their resources right now. And final point here is that regardless of the use case, each one we find is quite unique in its challenges. So we'll stop there now, and let's take